Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the eighth edition of the Urban Lens Film Festival. Good evening, or good morning, or good afternoon, whichever part of the world you're in and joining us. It's a real pleasure to have you join us for the festival. Urban Lens Film Festival, this is the eighth edition of the festival, and usually this festival takes place in the city of Bengaluru in India and also New Delhi. But because of the COVID 19 pandemic, this is the second year that we've had this festival online. As you all know, the festival has been put together by the IIHS Media Lab, and we have different sections in the festival that look at various aspects of the city, films made by student filmmakers from different schools in India, films that look at the idea of conflict in cinema, especially across time and history. Events that have happened. We're trying to see through films how our filmmakers responded to it, and there is a section which is on COVID 19 itself in India, looking at how filmmakers have actually thought about this moment. Why we're here today is because there's a newly introduced section at the Urban Lens Film Festival this year called Filmmakers in Focus. And we have three filmmakers who have Filmmakers in Focus. One is Philip Scheffner, who you will be listening to this evening, along with Armenian filmmaker Tamara Stepanayan and American filmmaker Joshua Oppenheimer. In many ways, Filmmakers in Focus is Urban Lens's continuing commitment to the idea of having a space which is not just about screening films, but to also have conversations around different aspects of film and the city. And especially create a space where filmmakers are able to speak about their practice. I mean, we find very often that filmmakers make the film and academics theorize about it. And of course, that's extremely important. But we felt like, as many of us practicing filmmakers ourselves, that it would be nice to get practitioners to reflect about the films and the context actually in which they are produced over a period of time. So it's great pleasure for us today that we have Philip Scheffner with us today, and he will be in conversation with Madhushree Dutta and Nicole Wolf. Welcome to all of you, Madhushree, Nicole, and Philip. And before I hand it over to Nicole to start the conversation, to get the conversation going, I'll introduce the three of them. I mean, for many of you here again, I'm sure you know all of them. You're familiar with the work, but I'll do it nevertheless. Philip Scheffner was born on May 28, was born in Hamburg, Saar, and has lived in Berlin since 1986, working on documentary films, video, and sound art. Three of his films, Havari, Day of the Sparrow, and Half Moon Files, are actually being screened at the Urban Lens Film Festival. So I would say please do go and watch the films. It's available online until 21st November. Madhushree Dutta is a filmmaker and curator of interdisciplinary art practices. Her nonfiction films on urbanology, identity politics, and contemporary culturescapes have been widely screened and awarded nationally and internationally. They're part of the syllabus in various university departments and study centers. She's also been jury to several national and international festivals, including Berlinale 2015. Madhushree is the former executive director of Majlis, a center for interdisciplinary arts initiatives in Mumbai, and currently the artistic director of Academy of the Arts of the World in Cologne, Germany. She's authored and edited books on public cultures, curated large-scale art events, designed various pedagogical courses, and initiated several public access image archive projects. Welcome, Madhushree, this time virtually to the Urban Lens Film Festival. And along with Madhushree, Philip will be in conversation with Nicole Wolf, who's senior lecturer at the Department of Visual Cultures, Goldsmiths, University of London. Her research, teaching, and curatorial projects have explored political feminist cinema and documentary experimental practices in sound, image, and word, including in India, in the context of anti colonial struggles and resistance movements in militarized territories. Her recent research and pedagogical practices focus on anti colonial agricultural practices, ecology, and climate justice. She also has a new book she's the editor of, which is coming out, which are on the films of Merle Kroger and Philip Scheffner. So it's due out in November 2021. So welcome, Nicole, welcome, Madhushree, and it's a real pleasure to have all of you here as part of the festival.
Well, thank you, Subhashree, for this great introduction. And yeah, thank you to the IIHS Media Lab and to Urban Lens Festival. It's a total pleasure to be part of this again. And I was able to be present last year, which was online as well. So yeah, the online situation does have an advantage. And it's such a great festival. So it's, and what Subhashree was saying, the stress on conversation and debate is really special. So I'm really glad I can be part of this again and be in conversation with Philipp Scheffner and together with Madhushree Dutta. So we talked a little bit before about how to structure this, and because of this kind of special setup, and in a way also my connection to, on the one hand, Indian documentary practice, and having just finished editing a book on Philipp Scheffner and Merle Kröger's work, maybe just I just wanted to say a few words about how we could discuss a connection between these different fields of discourse, and then we'll have various questions between Madhushree and me for Philipp, and then we'll also open out to the audience. And if there are questions while we are talking, I understand you can write in your questions, and we will receive them. And then if they fit, we'll take them in between as well. So my own understanding really of documentary practice has been very informed by the documentary practice in India, actually, and meeting activists, filmmakers and artists in India. And I think I actually also bring a lot of that learning to Philipp Scheffner's work in a way. And it's interesting to me to also think about those in connection. So just a few points. I think one of the aspects that might be interesting for Urban Lens audiences is the way, the extension of what might constitute the political in documentary, and how that is constantly renegotiated. And closely linked to this, I think, is what is really special in Philipp Scheffner's work, the deep connection between the materials and ideas that stem from intensive research that looks very closely and that creates a complex understanding of the very specifics of a context, its materiality and its structural aspects, and the questions that close reading and understanding of a context raises, and how that understanding leads to a specific form rather than a form being preconditioned by conventions of documentary modes. So one could call that, and it's often being called, an experimental documentary, but I also think that maybe that term can fall short, and it'd be interesting to have more of a discussion about that. Another aspect, I think, is the historical aspect of the work. So they're looking at multi-layered and constantly reinvestigated history of the present. And part of this is also the contribution of Philipp's work to the archival turn. And we'll be talking about, for example, Half Moon Files later as well. Another important point, and I think that might be particularly interesting, is the refusal of conventional storytelling with clear prefigured protagonists. And I think particularly in the context of Urban Lens, I think it's a very good space to kind of push against that sort of a demand for single human interest stories, which often kind of neglect a more structural look at the context that we live in, and that sort of drive filmmakers towards creating plots and stories that are closed or that present a fixed protagonist. So Philipp Scheffner's work very much rethink the question of narrative, and that'd be interesting to discuss further. And one aspect that has been very defining for me in working with documentary filmmakers in India, and that I also that is a strong aspect for me in Philipp Scheffner's work, is the film staging the what could be. Thinking back in relation to our possible understanding of the political, how do we use audiovisual media in creating the possibility to think otherwise than in pre-given mental and political structures, to create pathways for different relations. And later, hopefully, we'll get also to talk a bit more about what I might call like a refusal of divisions that we live by, to work from a radical conceptual equality. So yeah, just a few points where I can see links between debates within the Indian documentary context, not to say that this is the only audience, but maybe a majority of the audience, and what we'll be discussing. And we are very much looking forward for input from the audience and questions. I will start with the first question in relation to Half Moon Files, and then Madhushree, Dutta will join in as well. So Half Moon Files is one of the films that was available at the festival, and that many of you will have seen. Is the film and research project that developed along a very direct historical link between Germany and India, through the World War I prisoners who were captured in Wunstorf outside Berlin, and the recordings that were taken of these prisoners' voices for colonial scientific research. And that material is now housed in sound archives in Berlin. So I wanted to ask Philip to start talking about that film by asking, so that the film really navigates a vast amount of material and historical information, as well, also information and material that before that research wasn't available in the same way, linked to the colonial history of Germany and the racism that's driving much of the scientific research and propaganda at the time. And I'd be interested in how the film negotiates through this vast amount of material its own location in relation to the material, and the filmmakers and narrators' location, because also in that film, Philip, you're using a voiceover, also for the first time, and you are navigating that vast amount of material.
Yeah, hello, and first of all, thanks for the invitation. Thanks to Urban Lens Festival, and thanks for Nicole and Madhushree to take time to discuss with me. Yeah, it's right. I mean, Half Moon Files is the first film I was using my own voice as a narrator, and honestly, I felt very uncomfortable with it, because I never did that before for certain reasons, because this kind of narrator who tells the story is very often perceived or constructed as the voice of God who knows everything and leads you. And there's a certain authority there, or created, that I would normally neglect. But as with let's say the focus of Half Moon Files are voice recordings, so recordings of people talking, speaking into the funnel of a recording device. I felt it would have been somehow cowardly to escape my position as a narrator and not using my voice. So I felt my voice in itself is part of the problem. So I should somehow navigate through this various problematic fields. And so what I tried is actually to locate myself in different positions. I'm not sure if this came across by watching the film, but my voice or my narration appears in different, let's say, on different levels. One level is, of course, in the first scene, I am a filmmaker who wants to do a film and who's asking for permission that's the first scene, at the Vice Ambassador of India in Berlin. So I'm the one who wants something, but he's actually not getting it. So this is one, let's say, one figure or one narrative that is going through the film. There is somebody wanting to make a film, has certain desires, wants to tell a story, wants to tell a whole story, and is constantly failing. I mean, it's a film about failure, because many things does not work, do not work in this film from that perspective. So on the other hand, I wanted to, I'm a person who has, of course, much more, through my research, much more information than the viewer who's watching the film. So it's a strange mixture of having knowledge, but knowledge that doesn't lead to the goal of the other person who wants to make a film. So it's a very complex relationship, and I tried actually to destabilize my own authority in the film. So to also show that I'm not getting what I want, and to show that I'm not finding for instance, an image of Mal Singh, the main protagonist of the film. I wanted to introduce a certain suspiciousness, maybe you could call it, of the viewer regarding that voice who tells a story. I mean, who's that guy who's telling a story? I don't appear visually in the film, so you can't see my face in the film. That I find that important because many of the other voices also don't appear in the film. They are just there as voices, and we have to create our own image of that specific person. So I felt that distinction was important, to not appear with an image, but with a voice. And yeah, that's the main thing. I mean, the other basic thing I think I learned through researching and learned through trying to make the film is from what kind of perspective do I speak or make the film. And it's not a very comfortable position, because I would like to associate myself, identify myself with the so-called victims, let's say. I mean, of course, I would like to pretend that I'm very close to, let's say, Mal Singh, but of course that would be a lie, because I have no idea how it felt to be a prisoner of war, and I'm speaking from a totally different position. So I had to accept at some point that the closest position in the whole historical context is that of Wilhelm Dögen, a person who is doing sound recordings and doing something with it, having his own, let's say, desire or agenda to do something. So I had to somehow deal with the fact that there is a counterpart, and I have to question my own position regarding what is the difference actually. And so after a while I found out that really Wilhelm Dögen, with all his racism, with all his very complex desire regarding the voices that he was recording, is actually the closest I can get positioning myself in this historical context. And that was, when I found out that, I tried to highlight that at certain points in the film to overcome this kind of godly voice that's knowing everything. So the more you are suspicious of my position, the better, I think, for the film. Then the other strategy I tried to work with was introducing, let's say, alternative narrators of the film. There is one sound recording of a prisoner of war who's treated very differently than all the others. That is the voice of Bhavan Singh. That he's the one who's actually asking the basic questions in the film, like, who is a god? Who's a god? What I'm saying? Who is a ghost? How does somebody become a ghost? So if you watch the film carefully, you see that he's actually the only one whose voice is combined with images. So we see a landscape, like a foggy landscape, very much in the beginning of the film, where there's a zoom out. You can't really locate the landscape, and then suddenly there's a voice speaking, and it's like a speech actually, saying like, the old people have told me this story. So he's really starting to narrate a story. So he's constructing a story, and this gives him a certain authority. And I wanted to, again, highlight that so that I'm not the only one who's speaking. Another strategy I tried, and honestly, with the distance now, the film is like from 2007, I think, so it's quite old. If I watch the film now, there's one element that happens only at one point in the film, and I'm a little bit sad that I didn't do that more often, because there is a scene where I'm in the archive, and you hear my voice. I'm describing the amount of shellac records and all that, giving some kind of a historical wrap-up. And then my voice gets faded out, and it's overlapped by the voice of the archive custoder. I don't know how you say that in English. So this fading out, that my voice is suddenly fading out and somebody else is overtaking, I find this a very interesting strategy, so that my voice becomes, it's like that. I did that only at that specific moment in the film, and but for me, it's from watching from today, I have the feeling that could have been a strategy I could have worked more with, and it would have led to interesting results, I guess. I don't know if that answered your question. But
Yeah, thank you. That also leads me to, and also that brings in Madhushree now, related to the question of where the elsewhere is negotiated. And you've been talking about the difficulty of your position and your perspective. And like you said at the beginning, the idea is, or the failure that's in the film is that you are never going to India. But also when I was rethinking about the film again, and also with that current debate about return of archival stuff that's in the archives in Europe, and this, so can we return and repair? And I think what's so interesting in Half Moon Files is that there isn't a return, like the voices are not in a way brought back, but you have to deal with it in Germany, like in Berlin somehow, and you have to deal with in your own location. And that also links for me a bit to where you and Madhushree collaborated in a film which is also called From Here to Here somehow. And so this question of the elsewhere, and but also how from where we negotiate our own history, and then I guess as a white German, like negotiating our own colonial history by not going back somehow.
Nicole, maybe I come here. Philip, actually, it's nice to actually be here today, because we have discussed this film 10 years back a lot. And then yesterday I started seeing the film, and then I decided not to see it. I decided to respond to it the way I remember it. Not doing homework today, because I live in Germany today. My perspective has changed. I will read something else. And I suddenly thought, no, what I remember, what stayed with me 10 years back, and let's see what comes out of that. And then you just now talked, and I realized that this film is actually about documentary filmmaking, about making documentary, about making political narrative, not story, but narrative. And it's about that, because you talking about your position, where the director stands, where the protagonist, I think in this film at least the protagonist is very clear, and where the protagonist stands, the complex relationship, the whole thing about absence, about failure. These are all actually a film on documentary filmmaking, on historical filmmaking, and how do we negotiate. And that itself becomes a film that we don't get permission, we don't get visa, we don't get enough material. We make an archival film. I mean, you made an archival film on an archive which you are bypassing. I mean, this archive is POW's voice archive, which you chanced upon. Actually, we together chanced upon when we were researching for some other film. And it stayed with you. And what stayed with you is the absence of that. Mal Singh's voice is there, and Mal Singh can never be found. So what stayed with you is the absence, because the archive was there. And I remember I asked you one question earlier, that if we are all so critical about colonial agenda of archiving, why archive, why POWs were archived? It was a colonial agenda, anthropometric agenda. But because it was there, we could create an counter narrative, counter archive. And I remember once in MMB, I asked you this question and you forgot to answer me. Today, I ask you this question again. Okay. Yeah. That so what's our relationship with archive? I mean, we discussed this earlier also, that archiving becoming a fad, and archiving in a particular way, you know, the way things are preserved, way things are labeled, way things are outraged. I mean, Germany is a model. Germany is known for its museums and archives and records and Excel sheets, and that is becoming a model. And you dealt with it, and you are very uncomfortable with it. We can see it in the film. So I want you to visit today that your take on all this colonial archive, which is actually the base of Half Moon File. Half Moon File is about Malsing, but it's also about Philip Scheffner. Philip Scheffner's relationship with documentary material.
I think that one part to answer this is what I said before about Wilhelm Dögen, who collected all the material. So it's very important to, if I position myself, I see that my position is very similar and I have to deal with it. So I have to question my own position regarding to the person who collected all the material, and what are the difference between my positions now, 80 years later, and the person who collected the material, which is providing me with the source material for my film. So, I mean, without Wilhelm Dögen, I wouldn't have done the film. I wouldn't have started a career on doing this film. So I'm very much interwoven, if I like it or not, with this person who did something that I'm actually criticizing. So I'm not neutral at all. I'm absolutely interwoven, and I'm using, of course, also not only the same material, but I'm using similar strategies. I mean, I'm working with sound, I'm working with image, so I have to really. I mean, I feel the necessity to really question my approach on sound and image as a political project. I mean, that's why is the film political? I would say because it's questioning on the one hand, it's questioning the use of sound and image, and on the other hand, it's refusing to tell a whole story. And that is a little bit referring to the let's say the again growing interest in archives. There is a problem because, I mean, who's benefiting from that archive? First, who needs that archive? And this, of course, can change. I mean, like in time. I mean, there are different situations where different people, different perspectives are benefiting from that archive. But the main question, I think, is you have an archive which has a certain kind of object history. I mean, like a history, how it came into place. And it's most of the time, it's very, there are lots of holes and gaps. It's never a whole. There's always some, if you create an archive, there are decisions who say this is meant to be archived and others are not. So these decisions are there, they are implemented in the archive. And most of the time, these are political decisions. So I would say the danger in going back to the archive from a different time and a different perspective is now that I have the tendency to fill those gaps and 80 years later create a homogeneous story. And there is, of course, I mean, we are all, I mean, people who work in film, I mean, we like stories, we like narratives, we want it to become whole, but we have to refuse, because otherwise we would it would be a political project who's neglecting the failure of the archive. So for me, the most important way of approaching the archive is to find the gaps in the archive. I mean, to see what is not there, and to emphasize everything, to show that it's actually like a surface with many holes, and that there is that I'm refusing the political agenda to create a whole narrative out of it. That's one thing I would say. The other thing is that, of course, if it comes to this particular archive, it's very interesting because the interest in the archive has changed. I mean, it was created as you said, it was kind of a colonial project. So people did do voices. They stored it. Then the archive was more or less forgotten for many years. Nobody was doing anything. Then we and me and many others suddenly created interest in the project. We even created our own narrative saying the Half Moon Files. That's the title of the film, and it's total fiction. I mean, there's nothing existing like the Half Moon Files. But after showing the film, and after the film was, for instance, showing many times in India, I received emails by scientists, for instance, who were asking to have access to the Half Moon Files, as if. So my film was creating another myth of an existing archive, another narrative, and then suddenly scientists were interested in the archive from a totally different perspective, because there are, if you like it or not, there are there are recordings of languages which are only there. So suddenly this colonial project becomes interesting to people from the places where the recorded voices are originated, to create their own, maybe national, anti-colonialist or whatever. I mean, so they use it in their own narrative, and I don't have any control over that, and that's interesting. So this kind of, at a certain point where also the film ends, is I'm losing control. Somebody else is taking over, because there's somebody in India who's using my research to create his own research, which may have nothing to do with my research, may have a totally different political agenda, but I have to accept it, because my own work is part of that whole construction of history. It's never besides or outside of it. So I really like the idea that somebody is just taking, without asking, is just taking my research and using it for a totally different purpose, and I have to deal with it. And maybe, and these are, to allow that, I would say, is productive. I don't know.
It's such a wonderful articulation that you are actually. Is it equally very badly?
No, it's okay.
Okay, so going on my end. Okay, the thing is that one hand, in your first half of this talk, you talked about a very serious question, that aren't we using the same material and the same strategies that we are countering for? That is our relationship with image and sound, and what we call evidence and documents. The words that are very commonly used in documentary filmmaking, the same strategies we use to the ideologies which we are countering. So that's a very interesting point. But also, when it comes to Half Moon File, is that it's creating imagination of many archives that they don't exist, because you start your journey that Malsing is not to be found. Only Malsing's voice is to be found. Somebody may have written the label wrong. Maybe it is not Mansingh. Maybe it is somebody else. Maybe Milkha Singh. And then this whole thing is that you can't find Malsingh. You cannot reach to his village. I think this desire to reach to his village itself is the narrative. That why do you need to go to his village? You really expect that something of Mansingh will still be there in the village. I mean, of course, it's not possible. But somehow there is also a kind of guilt. It happens to documentary filmmaker that maybe I have not done enough research if I did not go to the land of the origin. It's a part of the research is to wash our own conscience that, well, I tried to find that person. Though your narrative is actually, it will go somewhere else. And it's very nice. Half Moon File is very fresh film, even after 13 years. 13 years is nothing for documentary films anyway. Only thing we have is the good shelf life. Our films stay long. Nobody watches it. Not too many people watch it, but people watch it through decades. And what is very fresh about it, that this critique about practice of documentary. I mean, you extended it in your other films. Somebody has sent a question which is very related. Philip, would you like to have a look at the question? And I think you already replied to
It's
it, but
already responded, I think,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Avita, I think Philip has already responded to it, but maybe he will say 2 more sentences about it.
Yeah, we
I
can
will
read it
send
out. So, yeah, thank you for documenting the voices. This is Abita K, which would have been otherwise lost. There are debates concerning if oral history is valid as it relies on memory. Isn't written history equally unreliable? How do you perceive history? And yeah, so you partly responded to that already.
Do you still hear me? Yeah. Yeah, I think I think the main thing is that I would say history is constructed, and if I'm doing a film on an historical event or an event that took place in history, I am part of that construction. So it's my responsibility to question the ways how I myself with my project are part of the construction of history. And so I would say that is, and this is independent of the material. I mean, if it's text or voice or whatever, I mean, how do I use it? And exactly what Madhushree said, in Hafun Files, I very often the problem that I was wanting to show certain things, but I didn't want to reproduce certain stereotypes that come along with it. I mean, like what does it mean to show an image which you yourself read as a total racist stereotype? So what do you do with it? I mean, you want to show it to show that that these are kind of images have been made in this kind of historical context, but how can you avoid that this image is again, let's say, working in its racist structure. So you have to find ways, you have to find strategies to counter the image where you are showing it. And that leads to a certain kind of what I really learned with Half-Moon was to be very, very aware of everything that happens besides the image. I mean, small things that are happening in the corner, and not let's say to deconstruct or to I don't know, untergraben, to
Undermine?
undermine the hierarchy that an image is implying. I mean, you see a face and you have the feeling, okay, that's where I have to look for. That's where I have to look at. Eyes, mouth, focus, center, whatever. But what happens here? I don't know, in the corner. And there's one good example for me that in the film where you have these small, we have images, photos, and then they're appearing these small drawings on the side where a kid has bought the book and has read the images in a totally different way. And for me, it was a very inspiring moment and a shocking moment also, because it took me so long to really understand that these drawings, who were totally refusing the hierarchy that was built in the image itself and countering it, that these were the moments I could focus on, and that these things that are at the corner and not in the center would help me to counter the image and to create another narrative. So because we always have to deal with, like, there is a certain hierarchy who's telling us this is important and this is not. And so you have that in every material. So if you have the voice recordings say the voice is important, and everything else is actually disturbance, the crackling, the small murmur of the scientists in the background. So if you deal with material, it's interesting to defocus and say, like, okay, there's the voice, but actually what happens in the background? And to look at what can the background tell us about the conditions, how this sound recording has been recorded. So the production aspect, you could say. And these things, I think, I learned through Hafun Files. It was very inspiring for me, and I tried to work on that further in my other films. So for me, Hafun Files was a very important film for realizing this kind of working with images.
Madhu, you are mute.
Sorry. Nicole, I think we are running out of time, so I think you should go to Haveri now straight, yeah?
Yeah. So there's another question that's referring to Half Moon Files, but yes, we're already 47 minutes into the conversation, but we'll try to come back to that. Jumping a little bit, but connected to the refusal, the undermining of sort of completed narratives and or storytelling. In relation to Haveri, so just trying to jump a point as well. So we were the book that we've been editing now really set out from bringing together or discussing together the work that comes out of the extensive research that Philipp Scheffner and Malik Röger are doing for their films, but that also lead into the crime novels, the political thrillers that Malik Röger is writing. So one of the important aspects in the book and in a long conversation that we've had about their working process was that refusal to start from a thinking of a clear distinction between documentary and fiction. So also not thinking of the films as documentary and the books as fiction, but to really start to, like we were saying now, in terms of looking at history as constructed, to look at the sort of the modes of documentary and fiction as constructed, but or looking closely like how and where and why something is defined as fiction and documentary. And the example of Haveri is Haveri, as where we have the film Haveri that many of you have seen, but there's also a novel by Malik Röger, Haveri, is really an excellent example of how the extensive research that both of them have done has led into different formats, whereby both formats negotiate documentary and fiction. And so we had two questions in relation to Haveri. So my question would be, because of the Haveri, and many of you, those of you who've seen, will know that puts the spectator in a very particular position and creates a perspective where we as spectators are looking somewhat down to a boat that is stranded. But I'm interested in, because of this sort of visual setup that is set together with a very complex weaving together of a soundscape, I'd be interested to hear you talk a bit about how you're perceiving the relation between spectator and protagonist, and that came up earlier a bit as well, as in relation to Half Moon Files. It's like who is the protagonist? How do we address the different perspectives of different protagonists that are taking part in the story? And to me, Haveri very much challenges the idea of a single protagonist and a spectator position. And yeah, so if you could start talking a little bit about what spectatorship, what role that plays in Haveri for you.
Yeah, first of all, your question was regarding the relationship between protagonist and spectator. That is actually not very easy to answer. I mean, for me, it's more obvious connection between let's say, the filmmaker and the spectator, because I think that especially also with Haveri, there's a very strong connection between the filmmaker.
My sound is a bit is that the same for you, Madhu? It's a bit difficult to hear you.
I can hear you.
I'm trying to use this.
Hello, 1, 2, 3. Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's a little interrupted for me, but I'm not sure whether it's the same for everyone.
So I was talking about relationship between spectator and protagonist, which is not so easy to answer, but I would say that you don't hear him very clearly here. I don't know what to do with that. I didn't change anything on my setting. So I'm hoping that this will be solved by the technique itself. Me myself as a filmmaker, I feel very close to, I'm very in a similar position like the spectator.
Philip, your sound is coming very bad. Maybe some kind of adjustment at your end. Nobody could hear you properly.
I will put my...
Yeah, now you're muted.
Better. I'm sorry. I'm not connected via Wi-Fi. I'm connected via alarm, so it should work. So it's still bad. Could leave and jump back. Yeah, I can do that.
Jami is saying you could leave and join back.
Now the question: how do I leave?
Okay, till Philip comes back, just to keep it on, let me, some people who don't know that Haveri, actually, the name of the ship has many lives. One is the ship, which was actually a YouTube small thing. He just chanced upon it on YouTube. Somebody like a travel video pasted, uploaded it. Then he traced back and did the research. Then the film. Then there is a novel called Haveri, written by his partner Mueller. And then there is a fiction which will be now premiered at one another called Euro. And all this is based on the that one clip. And it's literally a one clip, it's not more than 2 minutes. And which has created these narratives. That's very interesting, and that's definitely a formal intervention into the documentary filmmaking or narrative making. Yeah, there is Philip. Philip, I was just holding forth for you. You can.
I don't know if you can hear me. It's better now? Or?
It's better.
Very good.
Okay.
Yeah. Right.
So yeah, you were asking about the relationship between spectator and protagonist, and I said it's very, for me, that is a very difficult question. More easy, or more a question that is more in the center for me is my relation. I mean, the relation of the filmmaker and the spectator. And in Haveri, actually, I think there's not so much a difference. I mean, I see myself very often as a spectator. So when you in Haveri, the whole setup is that we are watching an image from the perspective of a spectator. So it's prolonged in the cinema hall, this kind of perspective. And me, myself, I'm also questioning, what do I see? So my questions that arise through making this film, I think, are very similar to the ones the person who is watching the film in the end have. Maybe there's a different time thing, that I had these questions earlier and then worked on the film, but the whole drama structure of the film, the way how things are really edited along these questions. So I think the questions that appear for the spectator are quite similar to my own questions. And my hope is that therefore we create a space which we share with the same questions, and we have enough time so that the questions can arise and we may find temporary answers. And so I have a strong connection with the spectator, and I see in Haveri, the position of the spectator is questioned because I see it as part of the problem. I mean, it's not something, it's a distant spectator, but exactly that is part of the problem. So also my own position is questioned, and I am part of the problem. We are part of the problem. It's not the problem of the people there in the small boat, but it's our problem. On the other hand, while working with the protagonists for Haveri, we were creating situations where they themselves are watching things. So they remember watching things. So we were trying to create a setup where we talk that is similar to the situation later, where we are watching the film and we are listening to voices that are describing a situation where they were watching something in the distance. That starts with Rimi Brier that's the first voice you hear, where she's talking about something about childhood memory, where she's sitting on at the window and she's watching her father being taken away by what she's referring to as terrorists in Algeria, and she's seeing this happening in the distance, but she can't do anything. There's a window in between, so she's. So, and the same thing happens if Terry Diamond is talking about. So a lot of this whole thing of watching something in the distance is constantly there in the setup of the situation and setup of the discussions with our protagonists. So we were trying to create common space, you could say, and this was the goal we wanted to reach was that by doing that, to create this common space, to alter the hierarchy that is there in the image, and that's the wonderful thing I think about this footage, is that if you slow it down to 90 minutes, you see the first impression is nothing happens, but of course hundreds and thousands of things are happening. And there are moments, maybe that's my hope, or that's the utopia of the film, that this inscribed hierarchy is getting, a little bit disturbed. And there are moments where you suddenly feel as if it would disappear, but in fact, it never disappears. It's not that you reach the stage of like, oh, now we are all the same. No, because it's still there. So it's how can you alter such an image without neglecting the basic political hierarchy that is inscribed there? And therefore, this whole thing of watching or observing is a crucial part, I think. I'm trying to bridge the distance that is.
Philip, now that you are talking about it, and suddenly I realized that in a way it is a countered journey from Half Moon File. Half Moon File, you come across this available material, so to say, document, and then you find the ghost around it, or you try to reach to the ghost around it, not the material by itself. Here in Haveri, you stayed in that. How many minutes footage was that which you found in YouTube?
3 minutes and 30 seconds.
Now you stayed on these 3 minutes, and on this 3 minutes you came back again and again. I mean, you as Pong and you as a single autonomous filmmaker. There is Haveri, then there is the novel, then there is again Europe. So there is the thing of you yourself going back to the 3 minutes again and again and spinning something else. So this going back. Now, why I'm asking this question? Because there's lots of questions coming, and my apology to the audience that we may not take everybody's name, but I'm trying to put the questions together. People are saying that if there is fiction and there's no difference between fiction and documentary, so then what happened to documentary? What makes a documentary? What is a documentary image? Now, very interesting, that is Haveri a documentary image? The 3 minutes image of Haveri, is that a documentary image? If that is the documentary image, then the narratives that we create, fiction, documentary, whereas, I mean, let's not get into this silly debate of the term, but let's really get to the essence of it, that how material can actually expand in the hand of whoever is working with it. I mean, can be filmmaker, can be researcher, can be whatever. And you yourself, it's very interesting, in this case, you've gone back repeated time to the same 3 minutes material. So can you talk about this journey, this different journey, 3 different journeys actually, to the same ship, same cruise?
Yeah, I mean, it's like, there are many ways you can respond to it. It's like, on the one hand, of course, you always have similar questions. I mean, we all know that as a filmmaker, there are some people saying you're always doing the same film and you're just doing it differently.
And you do. Actually, you do
To some
with the
extent
same
it's
film.
true. I mean, there are certain questions that come, you're never ending with it. I mean, you're not through with it. And one important thing I would say is that very often one unsolved question in a film gives birth to the next film. I mean, if we talk about Havari, it's very, very clear that we made a film afterwards, which is not premiered yet, but is a direct, you could say, ongoing thing, a question that arose from in Havari that we are dealing with in another film. But on the other hand, it's also that time is changing. I mean, an image is never neutral. It's not that you can deal with it and then you're through. But especially with Havari, I mean, we have to remember that actually we wanted to make a totally different film. I mean, and the decision to go back, as you said, to these 3 minutes and 30 seconds was actually a political decision. I mean, a decision to say that we start with this footage, it's inspiring us, we want to get to know more about it, we do research, we meet people, we create a film project out of it. And then we come back after, and we spend a lot of money. I mean, there's a lot of things that are involved. And then you come back to the editing seat and you see your material and you have the feeling, yeah, it's all very nice, but suddenly you realize the time has changed. I mean, we started the project in 2013, and then when we came back to the editing room, it was 2015, which was the peak of the so-called migration crisis, or whatever how you called it, in Europe. So suddenly there were boats, images of boats everywhere. And suddenly our whole film had to compete with that. So it had changed. So we felt the need that also we have to respond to that. We can't just go with like that and we're doing our film. And this then leads to a review of your initial idea. So that's the second time you go back to the boat, you could say. And then you have to think though, so what was actually your initial point and what is the material that you shot adding to it? Or does it help? Is it productive or not? And then in this case, it was very difficult because we really had to say, no, it's counterproductive. Our material is, the things we shot, we filmed with a lot of effort and a lot of patience and a lot of passion is actually counterproductive. Not because it's bad, but because the time has changed. So the looking at an image is never neutral. It's depending on what other images are next to it. And suddenly there were totally different images next to it. So we had to deal with it. And so we said, no, we have to focus on this one image and use only the sound and to create, and that is the next level if it also comes to documentary and fiction. I mean, we use a documentary image, but what I expect from let's say, a film or a documentary project is that it opens up a space. For me, that's the most important thing, that you start from this document maybe, or a very precise observation of certain things that are happening and analysis, and from there you expand and you open up a space, and this is like an offer to the audience, to the spectator, whatever, and to myself, to allow time and space, to create time and space to reflect on this on the image that started the whole journey. So creating space for me is the most important thing. And if somebody in the end perceived this space as fictional or documentary, honestly, I don't care at all, but I still believe in something that is called documentary practice, because I think it's very important to force yourself to really be precise and look at things in a very, very specific manner. And then and out of that, there can all kind of fictional stories can appear, and they are naturally appearing. I mean, that's, if you talk about Hafmann files, you have documents, but the creation of these documents was already there was so much fiction involved. I mean, so much speculation, so much you know, the scientists were thinking, wow, the whole world is here, but you have no proof. I mean, it's all like, it's such a destable situation. But you have to, you have to take it serious, you have to be specific, and from there on, something is expanding. And then you also have to, I guess you have to, it's interesting and productive to take even the fictitious aspects or the speculative aspects, take them serious and include them in the narrative.
You know, Philip, what works for you in your case. Now, am I going bad? Jamia, am I okay? Yeah, it's okay now. Philip, that because there is a sound artist in you. Before you became a filmmaker, you were a sound artist. You hear. Not too many documentary filmmaker, definitely not me. I hear as much as you hear. Actually, your films work on multiple audio tracks simultaneously, and is actually visually quite sparse. That's your strategy. I look at it as your artistic position, that you layered them. I mean, not only how many audio tracks are there, but in the way that how you source, or how, where do you reach with your sound. So I think you weave your narrative with sparse visual and much denser and thicker sound. And I'm saying this because actually I personally learned a lot, or maybe I have not learned, I wish to learn this from you, this ability to listen, and which is actually the subject of your Day of the Sparrow, learning to listen. And yeah, Nicole, do your history and ask the question.
No, there's also a question from the audience, which is a nice link to Day of the Sparrow. Nusrat is asking, in your films, landscape plays an important role. It's almost as if it is a character itself, whether it's the mist fields or the water. Can you talk a little bit more about this? And like, as it's included in the question, it really, landscape does play an important part in all the films. But yeah, in Day of the Sparrow, it plays a particular role because you are listening to the landscape, looking at the landscape, speaking to the landscape, speaking in front of the landscape, and that is really transforming how, also what in relation to what you said earlier, that, or what Madhu also said, that material is expanding, the landscape is becoming something else in Day of the Sparrow. So maybe you could speak a little bit to that, and then we're over time, but I think we're allowed a bit over time, so we'll just continue for a bit.
So I think landscape, of course, it plays an important role. I mean, in every film, it plays a different role. I mean, in Half Moon Files, I'm playing with landscape because, I mean, most of the time, this has something to do with specific spaces. It's not so much about landscape as such, but specific spaces where something happened. In Half Moon Files, it's the area where the Half Moon Camp was installed, and there's always this kind of distinction that you're standing there and you don't see anything because it's just not there anymore. On the other hand, landscape is an area or a space where actually people can meet. I mean, that's if you look at the landscape, there is a kind of expectation created if you look at for a while at a landscape. So time plays a role, that you're actually waiting for something to happen, that, I don't know, some deer will appear or somebody is walking through the image. That's also connected to the let's say, stereotypes you have in mind when you watch a film. I mean, if it's not a James Benning film, where you know that there were very little things happening. So it's actually a place where you meet. And this especially has something to do with the sea. I mean, in Havari, the Mediterranean Sea is a meeting place. It's supposed to be a meeting place where Europe and Africa are connected, and there are shipping lines, and there's like a whole lot of traffic going on for centuries. I mean, it was a place of meeting, but now it's a border region. So it's like an open area where you don't see the border, but it's totally defined by borders. And that is also happening in Day of the Sparrow, I would say, that there are invisible borders and that our whole landscape is defined by invisible borders. And that is it's a very important thing for me, that landscape has changed. It's never neutral. It's it's a result of political, let's say, fights and struggle that is forming landscape. I mean, neutral landscape never existed, even in paintings. It's not. It's always constructed landscape. So, and I think there is this very famous and very interesting film called AKA Serial Killer by a Japanese filmmaker, Masao Adachi, who is trying in the 60s, 70s, he was trying to tell the story of a young juvenile serial killer only by landscape shots. And he was trying to develop a whole theory of landscape as like not a symbol, as a Zeuge, how you say Zeuge?
Witness?
As a witness of political struggle. So you see only landscape shots, and he's very sparsely narrating the story of this particular person. So that was a film that was very inspiring for me. Now I lost track a little bit. I don't know if it's...
Yeah. Madhu, did you want to come in with another question?
No, but that's wonderful. I mean, like, I think that we are really running out of time. So I'll try to wind up. But as Philip Scheffner always insists that every film, I mean, there is nothing end. There is no a narrative, nor is one a reporter of Philip Scheffner, because he makes sure that everything is open. And in a way, I always think that his last film is the beginning of his next film. I see continuity in that. In fact, Nicole, for your book, I wrote that also. That is always the beginning of the next project is actually somewhere there if you care for and if you look at it later on. And that's very interesting. I mean, of course, like all fiction and non-fiction and documentary practitioners, actually, everybody does only one work in installments, but it's very obvious in Philip's case. Hangsa Thapliel has written an essay as question on archiving. So, Hangsa, since we know of you, we will reply to you if we can privately, or you can only tell us about archiving. We cannot answer this in a panel discussion. Okay. Sir, that's for you. Sorry for this very personal moment. Um, I think we have overshot ourselves. So, if unless Nicole and Philip have one last thing to say, I would invite Shubhashri to come in now. Nicole, you have to say something?
Yeah, not just to say, because you were referring to it. Yeah, so the edited volume also includes a brilliant essay by Madhushree herself, and a long conversation that I had with Merle Kröger and Philip Scheffner, and it's in German, unfortunately, right now, but we'll be working on an English version, or the text will be made. It's in process, but I think it'll be super important to have the text be available in English. Also seeing from the questions and the feedback in the questions. So thank you to Madhu. Thank you to Philip.
Thank you.
And, we'll hand back to Subhashri. Thanks.
Hi. I'm really sorry that we have to end this now. There's like lots we could discuss. I think Hansa has another question, and there are a few questions from others, but unfortunately, I have to be the school teacher and say we have to end now. So my apologies, but I really hope many of these conversations can continue, and this conversation will actually be available on the Urban Lens website and also on our YouTube channel. So perhaps one could also engage there. So thank you again, Philip, Nicole, and Madhushree. Philip's films are available to be watched until the 21st November. So if you haven't, please do. And see you all tomorrow at 5 p.m. IST. On the panel around labor in the city, and the panel discussion, the first panel discussion that will be there at 5 p.m. IST is called Sex Work in the City, which will feature Paramita Chakravarti, Neeti, and Gautam Bhan will be in conversation with them. And at 7 p.m., there will be a book discussion on Bombay Hustle by Debashree Mukherjee. And Debashree Mukherjee will be in conversation with Rohan Shivkumar. That's at 7 p.m. IST tomorrow. And once again, Madhushree, Nicole, Philippe, thank you. We really do hope to see you in Bangalore physically at the festival again and screen your films as well, Madhushree, and have you all together. Thanks. Good night. Bye bye.